Okay, we're going to get into a render phase pretty soon here. Before we can get into rendering, we need to talk about lighting. Some of you know or have already been taught a little bit about lighting. I want to do a quick review just to go over a couple things, because one of my concerns is that some of you might have covered it, but do you remember it, and do you know what it was about? Do you know some of the differences? So really quick here, when we're talking about lighting, what are we talking about? We're talking about having a light source inside a room that's affecting an object. That's pretty much what my basic definition of lighting is going to be. So when we look at lighting, lighting's basically broken down into there's two different types of lighting. One is parallel lighting and one is radial lighting. That has to deal with where we are in the world at a certain particular time and how the sun is interacting with us. Since we are on a sphere and we are rotating around, our lighting can change. And so the benefit of that is when you can look at a particular photo and you can have a good idea of what time of day it is by looking at that photo. Now, there is a difference depending on where in the world that you might be. Most of what I'm going to talk about right now in terms of lighting is going to affect those countries that are close to the equator. Okay, does everyone know what the equator is? Anyone? Yes, just checking. Yeah, it's a line that goes around the center of the earth. Okay, now I've had the opportunity to go to Sweden before, and I've been up in Sweden and walked out of a bar at 3 in the morning, and guess what time it is outside? It's still light outside. Okay, because you're higher up and you're closer to the angle of the sun, versus where you don't want to be is at Sweden in the winter time. Because in the winter time, it's the opposite, where they have more nighttime and they have less days. Okay, there are parts of Alaska that you could travel to. There's a part of Alaska that has no direct sunlight for, I believe it's 35 days. And I think there's even somewhere in the south of Argentina. Everyone know where Argentina is? Down in the south of the world, okay? Down by the South Pole, where you get no light, I believe, for like 40 or 45 days, depending on how the Earth is rotating and where the position of the sun is. Okay? Is it 3 months? Yeah. One of them, there was a time period, I believe, of 90 days for one of those spots. But basically, there are going to be points that change. So let's talk a little bit about some basic rules of lighting and what we know. Now, let's just start with this right here. Okay? I have a couple samples up here that I brought up. Okay? Parallel lighting and radial lighting, okay, has to deal with the position of the sun into the scene. And sort of the basic rule that I was taught, that I always still remember to this day, is that when the sun is inside my picture frame, whether I'm doing an illustration or a drawing, and it doesn't have to be the sun, it could also be a light source. I might have a street light inside my picture frame. That street light is going to be a radial light source, meaning that light is radiating from a core center and it is coming downward. Therefore, your shadows are going to be acting in a radial format as well. What we're seeing right here on the screen, this is not an example of radial lighting. This is an example of parallel lighting. This is a forest, but look at the shadows on the trees. Where are the shadows casting? They're all going exactly horizontal to each other. Now, I'm not going to draw on this. I'm just going to take my pen and go over it, but because this is in the viewer program in Windows. But if you look at these, see that shadow there is parallel. This one is parallel. The distance from here to here is the same distance from here to here, basically. There might be a light bend in that shadow because of two things. One, because of the tree. If the tree has a light bend, it would also dictate a bend downward in the shadow. And second would be the ground. If the ground is swaying up and down a little bit, we might also see a bend in the shadow, and it is. Why? Because it's snow, and when snow falls after wind hits it, it tends to create these little light bends that go up and down. If you look here, I'll show you one right in here. You see this light bend right here? Some people might call that a snow rift or a snow blend, where wind is blowing up and then coming down in between these, or maybe in the middle of the night the wind changes and now the wind's blowing this way, and it creates these up and down sort of. So if I were to draw magic lines over this geometry of the surface of the snow, I would see these light bends sort of happening. So look at the shadow here. Look at how the shadow casts and it goes pretty parallel, but then it sort of rounds off into that little hole there. That's because the ground plane is rounding. Okay, but this is an example of what I would call horizontal light coming into a scene, hitting objects, casting shadows that are going to be horizontal. Okay, let's take a look here. Now we have a direction of the sun. Okay, where now we have radial lighting. And how do we know that this is radial? We know it's radial because we can see that these shadows are converging back to a point. Do you see that? And if I were to follow those lines and go straight back, actually I would have to do it from the top. I would go from here through the top of that beam right there and continue forward, and that'll take me to the light source, okay, which is the sun. So, but I can tell that these are radial. Are these, and what do I mean by radial? They are radiating from one point. Are these parallel to each other? No, they are not. That means that the sun, so by looking at this photo, I have a good idea of what time of day it is. This is probably somewhere between 8 and 10 in the morning in this photo. Okay, or depending on the light conditions, if I had a little bit of orange or yellow on the snow, I might say, you know what, this is maybe around 4 to 7 p.m., depending where in the world we are and whether it's fall or summer. But at those two time periods of 10 to 2 and 4 to 7, those tend to be periods when our sun are coming downward. That's when the sun is rising in the morning, okay, or when the sun is setting. And those are going to be time periods when we have radial light sources. So what's a time period when we look at about 12 noon to, let's say, 3 noon? We're going to see lights and shadows that are going to be casting parallel because the sun is so far above us. Okay, when it comes directly down, all the rays are sort of parallel to themselves. Okay, so what you're seeing right here, just to draw this for you on a quick map right here, you need to think of this as basically this, is that here is the, excuse my horrible circle, but here is the Earth. Okay, and the sun is somewhere in about that position right now, and because of that, we are getting this radial effect that's going across right here. One of the differences is when we start looking at something that might be in direct day, the sunlight is so far above us, all the light is coming down at a particular angle that's causing the parallel shadows to happen. That is important to know because some of you don't know this right now. And that's a huge, that's an important part of, I have to go over lighting really quick with you, but I need to cover it from a standpoint that you understand why it's taking place and that it's not just, these aren't just Phil's rules that are taking place here. These are just rules of nature and perspective. So let's go across here. Here's another set of objects that are casting shadows. So what kind of shadows are these? They're radial again, right? We can see that because they're all radiating back to one point. So as I move along here, show you a couple other examples. What do we have here? Now this is could be a tricky one. These are parallel, okay? But where you see the bend happening in here, that's because the wood might have a bend in it. And that shadow is actually probably casting back from a piece of wood way back here that might happen to be, actually it's casting from here. And then you have this one coming forward. So there's other objects that we can't see that might be on the left-hand side. But when we look at the majority of these, we see, now, even though there are light curves in them, they are parallel. But again, the shadows are going to be affected by the curve of the wood. The shadows are also affected by the ground plane. So that's why we see some of these little bumps and we see the shadows rolling down, is that there is a slight hill here. Okay. However, though, as these shadows are casting by, we can sort of look from here to here and we can notice how these are very, very parallel to each other. We do see them converging. That is correct, because that's a golden rule of perspective. As items recede away from us, they will converge back to a vanishing point. Okay, let's try another one here. So when we look here, what do we have? These are radial. Okay, you could follow these, but they're very close to being parallel. Not too close, but it's at a closer time of day versus it's not an extreme radial. So now I can have a good idea and say, well, these are radial. If I follow these back, they do converge to a point. And if I come back to this one, they do. But when I'm looking here, you can see how close they are to being parallel. This is probably an early time of day between like 3 and 4 p.m. where the sun is starting to change, and we're starting to see a change happening between the parallel shadows and between the radial. But it's not this extreme, is it? Here you're talking a massive, I was going to say make a new word, extremiation. An extreme, which isn't a word, an extreme change, because the light is literally right up about right here inside the picture frame. And since it's so close, we're seeing this massive adjustment. Guess what? For you guys to learn more about light and how light casts, do you have to go buy a special book? No. All you have to do is step outside of your door in the morning and observe, step out in the afternoon and observe, and step out in the evening and observe. These are all things we take for granted every day. But this is a correct way that we have to learn on how to observe what is happening in nature. Look at the light rays that are peeking through these clouds. Are these radial? No. They are all parallel. You have numerous light sources here that are casting that are parallel to each other. They are parallel here and here and here. So one of the golden rules that I was taught, which still applies to all of these photos I'm showing you, is when the sun is inside your picture plane, it is either directly in front of you, behind you, or to a side of you. When the sun is, and therefore it'll be radial, when the sun is outside of your picture plane, it is so far away that the light rays that are coming down are going to be parallel towards you. Okay? So when we look over here, this is definitely radial. And when we follow these shadows that are casting and we go into this direction, we have an idea that the sun is probably about here or maybe up here a little bit. Okay? Causing those radial shadows to spread like that. All right? Now, why is this important? This leads us to this. To an understanding, when we go in and take our cubes and our shapes and we start creating a decision upon where light is coming from, that light and the direction of light is going to affect how the object is lit, and it's going to affect how the shadows are cast. Okay, not to mention it's going to affect how the object appears to us. In this example right here, light is coming at an exact side angle. Therefore, we have sort of a core shadow that's being created right here. Now, this might be hard to imagine, but imagine if I have, this is my grid plane right here. I have this imaginary world as a grid. The tip of my eraser right here is my sun. If I come over like this, what you're seeing right here is a sphere being right here, but my light source coming right here from the side. If I were to move that light source slightly into this direction, it would now change the casting shadow here, being from a side view, and that shadow would start casting out in this direction. So if the sun was back here facing towards us, this would start to cast back into this direction. Okay, give me a second here. I want to load this document up so we can take a look at it in just a second. Here's another example of parallel lighting. Okay, this is where sun is coming in, and look at all those stills against the wall from a staircase. They're all parallel towards each other. Okay, look at that right there. It's a little blurry, but see these poles right here? Look at these. Look at the distances between them. So I know by looking at this time of day, this is somewhere between like 10 and 11 in the morning. All right, let me come back to this guy here. What was the time? This is our light direction. Let me pull this up into Sketchbook real quick. 1 second here. Let me add another layer. Okay. Now I'm going to draw on top of this for a minute here. So when I work, one of the key things that I like to do is I create a lighting arrow. And let me draw that arrow for you. This is basically what my light arrow looks like. Okay. Uh-oh. That's really thick. Hold on a minute. This is what my light arrow looks like pretty much. For better or worse. Now that's at a side view. The great thing about my light arrow is now when I decide to turn it to figure out what exact direction. So this is an example of that. Does that make sense? Now I've changed the direction. If I were to go from the center here with a red line from here to here, I've changed the direction in which the light is coming. That light is coming away from me but towards me. Does that make sense? If I were to come over here and draw this for my light arrow, and I'm going to draw this even though I wouldn't really see the tip. Just going to draw a little bit of the tip there to give you an idea. Now this light is coming from me but moving away from me. Does that make sense? It's a three-dimensional arrow that I'm positioning, and that's going to dictate where the sun is coming from. That's a huge importance for me once I get into lighting. This isn't a lighting class. We could talk about this in depth at a much later point. But what I'm getting at is when I look at this sample right here, I know the light that is casting is, first of all, I have a shadow that's coming here, and I can measure the length of the shadow. Let's say the shadow ended about right here. And because of that, now I can figure out exactly where my light is. Does anyone know how I would do that?
Measure from the top of the shadow.
That's right. I would measure from the end of the shadow through the top of this sphere right here. And if I were to come over and take my ruler and draw a line from here, okay, the only thing I don't know is if the light's real close to me or way to the side, which is okay. It doesn't matter right now because all I have to do, if I decided the light was right here and I draw up, where these two lines intersect would be the light. Perhaps the light is further off to the side, a couple more inches. That means I would just take this and extend this off a little bit more, follow it straight up, and where those two would connect would be the basics of my shadow there. Okay, so I have a lot of students that don't know anything about this. They are lost when they look at lighting and they try to figure it out. Okay, in this example right here, why is this important to me? Because this is going to dictate how I render things. Students jump in and they start rendering and putting tone on things, and they're not thinking about where the light's coming from. You have to be considerate of where the light is coming from, and that will also dictate to you on how you establish and figure out how your shadows are cast. Okay, that's what I just said right there is such an important step. The majority of students that submit work that I see, as soon as I look at it, it has this object that was drawn in perspective that's correct. It has shadows that are on the object that are telling me what direction the light's coming from, and then it has some secondhand lame shadow that's casting on the ground that they just came in and did this real quick and drew that doesn't match any of the lighting that's happening in the scene. And when I see that, I immediately know you're way off. You're not doing what you're supposed to do to figure that out. So let's talk about that really quick. I know in this scene right here that my light is pretty much coming down in an angle like this, about at a direct side view, because this shadow is casting parallel. I know that's the direction right there. So if I were to come into some other samples, and which could be, if this was a lighting class, I would have you go into perspective photos or photos that have lighting in them, and then draw the indication of where the light's coming from and figure out that angle and plot it out. That's extremely important. For this class, we're doing sort of basic props. We're learning how to draw digitally. We're not going to get into all this hardcore detail, but I do need to show you this first intro. And now I'm going to make a segment. I'm going to jump into discussing and talking about some basics about how does a shadow work in a light source when you have a grid plane. Okay, so let me do this really quick. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to go ahead and just, it doesn't matter if I'm 1 point or 2 point. I'm just going to come in here off a 2 point real quick so you can see this. And I'm going to throw down just a couple of trace lines here really lightly. There's my horizon line. Pick my other VP1, VP2 right here. Put a couple light lines going across. There we go. I always like having something on my grid just so it's not so empty. It gives me a good eye. It gives me a sense that it's realistic and there's something happening there. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to draw a box right here. There we go. I have my box. Now, I'm going to think about, I'm going to have a light that's going to come casting down. And how is my shadow going to be created from that light? Well, one of the things we have to do in order to really understand how shadows are cast is we have to have a good understanding of how we draw through the shape, which is something we've been talking about in this class from day one. And it's something that a lot of you that have already had basic drawing have not figured out, which is how do we draw through the shapes and understand what's on the opposite side. Why is this important? Because right now, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to pretend I have a light coming from right here. Now, what do I not know about that light? I don't know if the light ends, touchscreen off. I don't know if my light right now ends here at the horizon line, which means the light is way back in the background. A great example of that would be if you went out at nighttime and you saw a street light on. One way in the back, that would be acting as a radial light source. Or is this light hanging down and is more in front of me, meaning that the base of that light would be hitting the ground plane about there? That's going to change the way that my shadow directions move. So let's go ahead right now and let's just say it ends right back here at the end. Okay, so how do I figure out my shadows? Well, if I know this is my light source or my sun, okay, I'd like to call it just my LS, my light source, for right now. And what I have to do is I draw an imaginary dotted line that comes down that hits the ground plane. And again, I'll cover in a minute why that ground plane is going to have an importance here. But when I come over, I'm going to basically take this dot here of where it hits the ground plane, and I'm going to draw an imaginary line through all of my corners. Right here, right there, every corner that's hitting the ground. And even though it's really light, it's actually on the same line right there. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is to determine the shadow after I've gone through that bottom line is I come up from the top of the light source and I come up and I draw that through the top of the object. Boom. There's one point there. There's a second point there, which is really close. And now coming off to this third point. Okay. Oops, not quite far enough. Right there. Right there. Okay, where those little lines connect and interact, I just connect the dots now to there. Excuse me, I keep sneezing today. Into here. Okay, that's my shadow right now for my light source being right there. Okay, but what happens if I do this? What if I say that my light source is in the room and it ends right here? Now I'm going to draw this in red and show you the difference. Now I have to come in here on red, and I'm going to draw the shadow coming from that point going that way. From that corner we'll go that way. And then from this end corner we'll go that way. See how that's working? And now I'm going to come up from the top, and I'm going to connect through all three. So from this corner here, that's point 1. And come back from the second corner there. Okay, where it hit right there, that's point 2. I'm going to come back right over here. Wait a minute, let me check thing. I had 1, 2, 3. There we go. And from this end here, connects to right there. Okay, let me double check. There we go. Now I'm going to connect these lines together to there, to there. That recedes back to that edge. That recedes back to that edge. Okay, there. See what I did now? By bringing that light closer to me into the room, what happened? I changed the effect of the shadow. Okay, so now let's think about that for a second here. I'm going to carry this, I'm going to recede this line back over here to the vanishing point. Okay. Well, if I look at the blue line, the first light back here, when it was back here, further back on the horizon line, let me ask you, let me label some facades here. This front facade is 1. The side facade here is 2. This is 3, which is directly in front of us. 4 on the side, 5 on the top. Okay. With this light back here that ended at the horizon line, what facades were getting probably the most light? 1 and 5. That's right, because light is coming down in this direction, and the first facades that are going to get hit by light are going to be facade 1 and number 5. That's extremely important to me, because what does that tell me? That facades 1 and 5 are going to be the brightest. And so what facade is going to be the darkest? Actually, I forgot to put 6 in there. Facade 6 is the darkest. Why? Because no light can hit it. It's on the ground. Nothing can see it hit it. Nothing can touch it. But what would be the second darkest then? 3. That's right. And now what would be the two planes in between those two that would be getting some light from that light source?
2, 4.
That's exactly right. So that right there just gave you an organizational method on how the values of those the tone values would work. 1 and 5 might be a 2. 2 and 4, excuse me, what did I label 3? 3 was this front side here. So 4 is this side here. 2 and 4 might be anywhere between like a 20 to 30% grade. 3 is going to be somewhere like a 50 or 60% grade. And 6 is going to have almost no light at all on it, depending if the box was tilted up a little bit or had a little crack, is going to be somewhere between an 80 to 90 to 100% dark. What's a great example that you can do with your own hands is you can take your hands like this, and you could come over, and I have light coming from above me, and if I go like this, what happens when I close my hands together? It gets black right in the middle. Why? I am limiting the amount of light that is traveling, hitting the top of this hand. Once I close my hand completely, I see black. Another great example you can do. Did you guys ever do this when you were a kid? I can't see. But you can see a little bit, because when you cover your face, you have a little part of your knuckle that's allowing a little bit of light to come through. And that light that's coming through is bouncing around and traveling. So light bounces and it travels while it moves. Okay, so what's going to happen now, let's talk about shadows for a second. Okay, so wait, let me back up there. We talked about that light source. Now let's talk about the red sample. If my light was still at this height but was in my room now, what facade is going to be the brightest?
2 and 5.
That's right, 2 and 5. Why? I brought the light into the room and I could see how it's interacting on the grid. Okay, so who had lighting in perspective? I mean, in basic drawing. Did they talk about this? No, that's the problem. Okay, now that I have that light closer to me, this is a huge difference where I have to just sit and talk to myself and say, okay, what side now is going to have the brightest? It's going to be 2 and 5. That means 1 and 3 are going to be secondary, and that means 4 and 6 are going to be the darkest. Okay, now something to think about here. Let's talk about shadows now. Shadows are dictated by the intensity of the light source and the distance of the light source. So what are some differences in intensity of light sources? Anyone? Candle versus a flashlight or a light bulb. That's right. Okay. The sun, what are you not supposed to do? Stare at the sun, right? Because it's really powerful. And versus a headlight of a car. Okay, both of those light sources, all these different light sources are going to cast shadows differently. And the difference in that is going to be, so imagine if this right here, let's say the blue one that ends back here on the horizon, if that was a street light that was really small, it's going to cast that shadow right here, this blue shadow that I already drew out. Excuse me, I lost the ruler there. Let me darken in this blue here just a teeny bit more. There. Uh-oh. Gosh darn it, and I did it in red. There. So that's the blue shadow right there, right? Okay. So if that is one light, a small 100-watt bulb that's in the back of an alley, how crisp is that shadow going to be right now? It's not. It's going to be very diffused, which means it's going to have broken edges and it's going to lightly sort of fade off. Okay? Because the light source is so far back. Even though that 100-watt bulb might be pretty powerful, it's so far back in distance, I'm going to have a very diffuse set shadow. Versus, if I come over and imagine that this red line going all the way up to here. This 100-watt bulb is now in my room, and it is exactly 3 feet from my box. What kind of shadow is that red going to look like? It's going to be very hard edged, right? Why? Because I now have a light source, which the intensity is really close to my object. Therefore, I'm going to be getting a nice hard edge casting off of that. Okay? That right there, folks, is the foundation of lighting, of understanding the intensity of the light source, what direction it's coming from in terms of perspective. Is it coming behind you? Is it coming from a side view? Is it coming from in front of you? Like, let's say this is way up here, 3 inches above, but is the light casting in that direction, which would change the shadows? Okay, these are all important things that you have to consider when you go in and start lighting parts of. We're going to light our vehicles. However, though, I'm going to show you a real simple approach to lighting your vehicle. But I needed to cover this with you because this is really important information that you need to learn as an artist. Okay, so really quick here. Let me go in and talk about another example or two. What would happen if I had, not to confuse you, but where do I want to draw this from? If I had a wall that was right here, that ran back to this vanishing point that I have here. If I have a wall right there, and if I had the red light, what would happen?
You would go up the wall.
It would go up the wall now. It would hit right here where it hits the end, and this would go up, okay? And then it would come up right here. And then where it hits those lines casting is where it would stop. And I could draw that light receding back to that vanishing point, and that would now be part of the shadow going up the wall because I placed an object in front of it. Okay? So, speaking of that, let me go back. I want to do another demo real quick here. Let's add another layer here. So let's talk about, those are some samples there. What happens if we have, again, let me just do this super quick. I always have to throw a grid down. I started teaching my online class the other day. First thing I tell students when I get into environments is you need to sketch down that grid. And that class will be offered here too in fall. That's the first thing you need to do is throw down that grid. It dictates to us a sense and creates a feeling of depth and overall perspective around us. So if I come over here right now, and if I have these elements that just happen to be random, 3 poles, okay, and if I were to say the sun is way up at 10 o'clock in the morning, way up to the side, what am I looking at right now? The sun is going to be out of my picture plane somewhere to the right. I know that my shadows are going to be casting parallel. So I could come in here and decide, are they casting this way? Doesn't matter, whichever way they are casting, all these lines will be parallel to each other, like so. That makes sense? But let's say I came up here and said my sun is way up here and it's ending about right here. Then I could draw a line and indicate, hey, that's going to end there. And guess what? This line will now be parallel to all the other lines. Okay, there. So that would be my sun way up above me at 10:12, coming down and casting parallel lights. Okay. Now what would happen in this scene if I came back to this scene and the sun is now setting? The sun is right here in my picture plane. The world is turning and the sun is going bye-bye. I'm about to go to nighttime. I would come down, I draw a line down to the bottom here. From that bottom, I'm going to connect that through every one of my bottoms that are here. And then I come back to the top and connect that through each corner. That that one would end about there. This one's going to go off the page. Let's see what this one does here. That's going to go off the page as well. But when I come back now and I look at this shadow here, and here, and here, let me draw one more real quick. So I don't know why I did those lines. I just misplaced the ruler, but there. Okay. So I had to put that other one in there because I wanted you to see where the shadow ends. Right there. Okay. Now, this is my light source, my sun inside my picture plane, right? Look at my shadows. They're all radial to this point, but what's important is not just the direction of how that light's coming down, but it's also where that line hits the ground plane. Okay? If that wasn't the sun, and if I had a light source on right here, but was in my room, that's still radial, right? But now what's going to happen? I bring that down to the ground where it would be. There. So now do you see what happens if I bring that light into my room? Is it still radial? Yes. Is the sun in my picture plane? Yes. But now I've changed the direction of all the shadows because it's close to me and I'm bringing that bottom line down to the ground. So all my shadows are going to be right there, here, and here. Okay, just to go over some basics. Now, really quick, let me back up in here. How did I close my layers? Let's get my layers back open. All right, let me take that one off. Let's come back here. I threw this guy in here because I wanted to ask you a question. This is pole 1, 2, 3, and 4. Which pole is going to have the crispest shadow? Why? To what? That's right. It's closest to the light source. Now, I might not notice that much of a difference. Why?
Depending on how far away the light is.
Exactly. The light might be so far that these poles are only 20 or 30 feet from each other. But depending on the conditions, the time of day, the light intensity, all these variables. Is it a rainy day? Is it a cloudy day? Have you ever seen the sunset and for some reason the whole sky is purple? Because there might be light clouds or rain that are picking up reflection from the sun and the aurora borealis is interacting in there or whatever, and all of a sudden we get this weird purple or really cool looking, sunset, right? Those could be factors that could change. There are tons of different factors that could affect. Okay, am I winter? Am I fall? Am I summer? How close am I to the sun? There's probably going to be a difference on shadows cast in the summer. Why? We are closer to the sun because it is summer. Therefore, it's hotter. In winter, the sun is further away because we're rotating or going around some type of rotation, and that's why we get winter. Can you imagine if there was no sun? Constant winter 24/7, right? Okay, so we'd all be gone. So basically, back to this. Those are some questions to ask yourself. Now, here's one that's a little tough, though, is that as I have the shadow in front of me, I know which shadow is going to be crisper. Okay? Which shadow is going to be the lightest? Huh? Nope. Nice try.
Oh, one.
One. Because that's right. This is where nature comes in and atmospheric perspective comes in. Because of atmospheric perspective, shadow number 1 will be the crispest because it's closest to the light source. but it recedes so far away from us, it's going to be the dullest in terms of value. But shadows 4 will be the darkest, but will be the most delineated because it is furthest from the light source. It'll be delineated, it won't have as many crisp edges, but since I am standing right here in the front, it is the closest one to me, and the rules of atmospheric perspective state that as items recede away from me, they always get lighter because they're getting indulged by their atmosphere. Okay? That's something weird to think about. Do you know how many artists and students go on to, oh gosh, what's that website you guys all go on to? DeviantArt? This is the difference when I go to DeviantArt and I see a student's work and I can immediately look at a painting of an environment and I can know if they've had any education or not. I can know if they understand lighting and perspective. I can look at their shadows and see if their shadows are casting. Okay? What happens here if I have this? A hole in the ground. A pothole. The shadow is going to hit here. It is going to drop down. After it drops down then, I have to come back and I have to connect back from the bottom lines again. Right? I have to draw through my hole in the ground and figure out that when that comes back up, it then will come back up to, look at that, the same place. Holy cannoli. Look at that. See what the shadow did? It just dropped, went down, and came back up, and it's in the exact same pattern it was before. Oops. All right? Things to think about. So the examples, these are things you guys take for granted, but when you have a shadow that's casting, so some of you are working on your vehicle, and if you have a round cockpit shape to your vehicle like this, excuse my horrible drawing real quick, but okay, what do I know that's going to happen to that shadow from that light source? It's going to cast from here, and it's going to wrap to what? It's going to wrap, yeah, exactly, you're right, John, but it's wrapping to basically the surface of the item that it's on top of. And if that shadow came all the way down to here and then hit the ground, and if the light was strong enough, it would just keep casting from here like this. See that? How that works? That's why I have to show you this, because now once I go in and take a vehicle real quick and we talk about having a light source coming from above, you need to understand where that light source is, how it's casting, how the shadows hit the ground, and so on. Okay? All right. 1 second here. Okay, so we talked about that part. Now let's move forward. I just did a real quick rough here of my vehicle in perspective. Okay, I don't want you guys on your drawings to really worry about radial lights right now. That's a little too excessive. You don't have to worry about that. But what you need to think about is that if I'm going to cast a shadow, here I have my vehicle that's sitting here. How is my vehicle casting a shadow? So everything we're going to do from this point is pretty much parallel. Okay, so what I would recommend, and what you'll see a lot of artists when they do this, is we just put a simple drop shadow underneath, and we pretty much pretend that the light is just coming down at a slight angle like so. Okay, so now the question is I need to figure out how that would work. So one of the first things that I want to do, what is something that most of you should already have done, is you should have a dedicated center line for your vehicle to understand where that center line is coming down. There's the center line of my vehicle. Okay, and this is important. From that point on, what I did is I checked this, and I just drew this really fast here. But look, when I come off of this vanishing point, I had a fin that was sitting in this box here. So I went ahead, went off my center line, and measured that box. I split it. Roughly, I discovered that from here to here would be the other box shape about right there. So that's pretty accurate. And then if I cross another center line going across the y-axis or the x-axis coming back this way here, I'm probably going to have something that's going to lead from about here, and then that's going to end to about right there. So I can't really see that part. And then if I draw a dotted line, I have a good idea of how this is going to come back and then connect through here, just like it does on this side. Does that make sense? I drew through my ship really quickly. Jarek, you have that weird look on your face. Okay, you good? Okay, just making sure. There. So now I've drawn through my shape, okay? Rule number 1, what do I need to know? To get my shadow, I have to understand where my ground plane is, okay? Shadows are really important because they keep our objects from floating. So I can decide in here whether or not I want that ground plane to be right here and my ship is 1 foot above the ground, or I can decide if my ship is 5 feet above the ground. That doesn't matter. But what I do need to know is I need to pick one point of where I want it to be. Once I pick that point, I'm going to go ahead and say right here. Then all I have to do is connect a series of parallel lines through the key points of my vehicle on that ground. Let me show you what I mean. So now that I drew that point here, I'm going to just recede a line back here, backwards like that. Okay? And I'm going to come in here and decide that my light is going to be coming in at an angle like this. Okay? So if that comes in there, that's the point I wanted. That nose point is going to hit right there. Do you see that? Because my light's coming in at an angle. All right? You know what? Here, let me make it easier. Forget the angle. I'm going to do it lights coming from straight above. All right? My light's coming down in this direction right here. And I'm just going to come in here and connect from that point. And then I've decided it's going to be that high above the ground. It's going to connect right here. Okay? Now, I want to find where this bottom square back here, where that hits the ground. Well, all I have to do is I draw a line across. Okay? I just bring this line from this corner straight down. I bring this end straight down. I come back over here. And that's where that's going to connect right there. It's ending before the end of my box. Okay? I want to find out where this is going to connect. Remember, my light rays are parallel. I bring a light straight down to there. I have that line down there. Now I know I'm going to have a curve that's going to go from here to here. See how I got that? I'm just transferring the information over. Now I need to know, how does that curve, that shadow? Well, I have to draw through to figure that out. So now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to draw a parallel line, parallel with my other light, go through that corner right there, bring it down, come back to my vanishing point, carry that line across, like so. Where these two hit, right here, will be that other shadow right there. Okay? I need to get this point right here. I'm going to start to bring this down. Everything from this point is me just transferring the information over. Okay? I had my wing come here. My wing ends right there. I have a curve in my wing coming. And I could literally take the distance from here to here, mark that distance. I can get a rough idea that that is exactly how my shadow is going to cast. It's going to hit here. It's going to go across this way. And then when it hits right here, what is it going to do? It's going to come back and bend to here. There, do you see how I figured that out? And I'm going to keep going. I have the other side right here. It's about right there. You know, I'm slightly off on this right here because if I measured, I looked at my line, it's over, and the end was actually about right here. So if I come in, that little adjustment right there can pull it out a little bit further. Okay? The ship's going to come back this way. Recede that back. I have the other fin corner here. I bring that down to about there and there. Let me check something really quick here. Actually, the fin is going to end over here. So if I follow that, that's my rough again being slightly off. About right over there. If I bring this down, the other fin is going to go over here this direction. Find these points that are there. Those are the wing inserts. And now I know that other part of the shadow is going to go that way to where it ends about there. And then I had the little overhang part here. And that comes down. It's going to extend off to about right there. Okay, there we go. That is going to be my shadow that's going to be casting from, and I know it's getting a little rough here. I'm going to try to pull it out a little bit more. From this vehicle that's going to be floating right up above it. All right. The key that I had to establish when I started that is I had to just figure out where I wanted the shadow to start. That's it. If I decided that I wanted the shadow to be right here, that would mean that this ship is just 10 feet above the ground and closer to me. If I decided I wanted the shadow to be right here, that means it's just a little bit above the ground. Okay? This is important for me because now I have an understanding of where my light's coming from. So if this is what I was going to get into on Wednesday, was we're going to start talking a little bit about shading. And what I'll do is I'll prep a scene like this, and I'm going to go in there and talk a little bit about rendering and light. We don't have to go hardcore rendering, but it's up to you. But going over an object really carefully and just putting shadows on there and giving me an indication of light source makes a huge difference than just leaving it blank. And understanding that now if I know if I have light coming down here, I know, let me do this on a separate layer here. I know in terms of shadow that if light's coming right down on top of this, that I'm going to have some shadows going along the side of this, right back over here, because light might be brighter right here. I'm going to have a little shadow on the side here, might have a little shadow on the vehicle there. Okay, I could go in and now I can start to render this. I know light's going to be hitting here, it's going to be brighter, therefore there might be a light gradation that comes down, then it might be brighter here. So now I could come in and start addressing some of these gradients onto my ship. And then I could, once I have my linear detail and everything else on there, I basically get in and start turning facades with different tones of value. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the direction we're headed into. I didn't want to get into tone right here, but what I wanted to do is to show you how I established where that shadow is. And again, just by connecting some simple lines. Now, if I decided, I should have drawn that separate. Let me put a layer on top of it. Let me draw the ship again. It's going to have a little bit of a curve there. Let me take this off. I know that's horrible, but just bear with me real quick. Just get the center line of my ship back in here. There. So if I decided now that I wanted to have my light be at a little bit of an angle, that's just going to affect my shadow, right? Now, if I decide this time that I want the shadow just to be a couple feet just slightly below, that's fine. Okay, I could start my shadow right here. But now I'm going to decide to tilt it at a little bit of an angle. So I might decide that light's coming in at an angle like this way, in this direction. I like to put a little bit of tilt on my renders because now that's going to mean that if I have a canopy pod right here, let me draw something in here real quick. If I have some type of a pod right here. Let's say I have a fin that's right here. And if light's coming this way, now that means I'm going to have a shadow that's going to cast from there. Okay. Perhaps I decide, you know what, that's too extreme. That's fine. Maybe I want my light coming in. I just want it a little bit more at an angle like that. Okay. Or actually, what if it's a little bit of a tilt like that? That's fine. That's still going to affect how the rest of my plane is hitting the ground. One thing that I'd like to do that I find to be really, really beneficial is if you come over here and you draw a cube around your vehicle. So watch what I'm going to do here. Okay. Why do I want to do this? Because now, remember how I showed you guys how you could figure out points? Remember when we were looking at the thumbnails? Okay. See what I just did? I just drew through the shape, and now I know exactly where that front... Sorry, my ruler went a little bit past there. Let's go to there. Okay. By drawing this imaginary square around my vehicle really quick, what this enables me to do is if I decide to have light come down at an angle, all I'm going to do is translate that cube first, rule number 1, and then I'm going to come in and plot these points. Here, here, here. You can even plot this, the highest apex or curve of the wing, and then I could figure all that out. So let me give you an example of that, okay? Let's say that this is our light source now. Let me just redraw it. Let's do it in yellow. Let's say, no, let's keep it in red actually. Let's say my light's now coming in this direction, right? I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to come over here, I'm going to make that parallel right here. I'm going to draw another line over here, parallel, like that. Now, I have to determine how high it is above the ground. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my mark right about there. Okay? I'm just going to set any mark. But what I need to do now is find the middle of the ship. So I did that by going off of this line. That's the middle of my ship. How do I find that corner? I'm going to come off this line parallel. That's going to be the corner. How am I going to find that corner? I come parallel. Look at that. That distance from here to here with that is the same one as that line right above it. Does that make sense? And now it's just, I'm going to continue. Let's plot the whole cube down below. Here I'm going to do it in another color, in blue, so it stands out a little bit more. Okay? I'll do it in the light blue, and then I'll draw a dark on top of it. There. So I'm going to come in parallel. I have that line there, right here. I'm going to bring that line down. I have this line coming in here like that, like that. I'm going to now recede this back to the vanishing point this way, where that hits right there. I'm going to recede that one back this way. All right. That corner is going to end right there. And look at that. It's that cube transferred exactly down. That's the square down here, this blue square. Does that make sense? Is the same square as this red one right up above it. Now I'm just going to transfer down the points. I know that that's the center point. I know that this fin ends here. It comes to here. I'm going to recede a line back this way. And then come in parallel where that ends there. Oh, look at that. This line from here to here is now represented from here to here. See how I figured that out? It's pretty easy, right? Anyone? This is like, no, I don't know what he's talking about. I just brought the square down, and now I'm just measuring. I need to know where this end of the ship is. So I'm going to come here to the end, come down here, recede back to the vanishing point, and then bring this down, and where that connects, that's going to be the end of that ship now, right there. See that? I need to know where this point is right here. I'm going to bring that to the outside of my square. I'm going to bring it down, bring it back over, draw a line down where that connects. I connect these two dots right there. That's now that shadow right there. Do you see how I did that? Okay. Now I need to find the end of this wing. Well, that's easy. It's already there. I just bring it down to the parallel light. It's there. But I want to bring that apex. I want to know where that is going to be. See that? So I'm going to bring that apex over to the edge, bring it down, recede it back, draw a line down, connect. Now I can connect. I have 3 dots. 1, 2, 3. I now can connect a line from there to there. Okay, that's exactly how that wing's going to be. Does that make sense? How I'm figuring this out? Just going off of points, connecting the dots. Okay, now I could bring this back. I have this little point here that sticks inward while that sticks out. So I bring that line back to here. I drop back down. I recede that back over. Drop the angled line in. There it is. So that's the curve of that angled fin. And then the body's going to jet back out a little bit more like that. So let's do the other side now. Let's draw through the shape. I'm going to come over here, draw a line. My rough drawing is a little off. That's okay. I draw a line through to the other side. I get that right here. Okay. I know where it is. I'm going to bring that to the edge, bring it downward here, recede it back, which should be on the same plane as this one. It is. When I recede that back here, bring that back over, there, or there to there. That's going to be the other shadow coming in. You see that? Because that fin that ends here came to that edge, dropped down. It's going to be there. Same thing here. This fin ends right there. I brought it over, down. It's actually going to connect right there. But I'm not going to see that. But what I needed to get was that curve that's in there. That would be a dotted line. And then if I wanted to figure out, oops, where I have that, I just draw through the shape here. I can bring that back over, down, back here, figure that out, and then I could draw that line there. Now I know I'm going to see that's going to come back to the other side. It's going to hit there, and there. Curve a little bit there. But now I figured out exactly how that shadow of that ship is going to cast. Does that make sense? That confuse anybody? Good, because now we're at an hour in this demo. Didn't mean for it to go so long, but just some basics to cover with you guys. This is how I establish what a shadow is going to be. This question comes up to me all the time, and I know people that do this in Photoshop, because I do it sometimes. If I wanted to save myself time, and I wanted, let's say my object was just an inch above the ground, is there going to be a lot of transference happening in just an inch? No. So what I could do is this. I could come on with another layer. Okay. Sorry. See what I just did? I could take the silhouette of the ship. Uh-oh, hold on. Hit rotate. I know. Go to move. See? This little trick. Now, if I put it right under the ship, right there. Hold on. Stop. Stop. Right there. It mimics pretty closely the shadow, doesn't it? It's a little trick of the trade that you can do. You can quickly put it under. However, though, what I like is that I think there's a difference by adding a little about an inch to 2 inches of space. Makes the vehicle feel like it's floating a little bit more. And then there's something mathematically that happened that's interesting where you can see that that shape is that shape, but it's changed because it's going along the ground plane. Okay, so if you want to take that shadow, what's cool about that is I just drew over the other one that I had, right? Is it, let me go to move here. Is it if I, let me do it from here. Is it if I move that, come on, why is it not moving? Oh, sorry. Oh, it's moving the whole thing. Gosh darn it, hold on. Stay. Why is it not doing it? There it goes. So what's cool is if I take the whole shadow now, and if I move it down to about right there, you can see it's not really on, is it? Does that make sense why it's not on completely? Because the ship is up higher and the ground plane is changing elevation because it's further down. So that's why it helps to plot it out. Okay? But, okay, stop. There it goes. But what's important to me in this is the direction of the light. The shadow is important too, but it's all of this coming together full circle into one program, which means that from the direction of that light, let's talk about facades real quick. I can make some statements now and say, hey, I have a canopy that was right here. Sorry, wrong layer. I have a canopy that was right here on my ship. See that? And then I have a wing that jettisons outward like this, if I were to split this. So now I can make some statements. I could say that number 1 and number 1 right here, let's paint by numbers, is going to be brighter, and number 1 here, then right here I'm going to go 2 to a 4. What does that mean? The value is going to change. Why? The light has having to wrap around the shape. The shape is receding away from the light. Let's say I had a fin down here on the bottom that came outward like this. And here it is on the other side. Okay? Now, that fin that's underneath, what else can I say? I have a 1 here, maybe a 1 there, maybe a 1 that goes off to a 2. What's that fin going to be right here? It's going to be like anywhere from like a 6 to a 7. Why? It's in shadow, baby. It's completely underneath that. It's overlapped. This is all shadow back in here, folks. What's that fin going to be? That's there too, but it still has an upward facade, which means some light that's coming down here is going to hit part of this fin right here. Does that make sense? This is dark, but if that's the underneath of the fin, if I walked around on the other side and looked on top of the fin, it's going to be lighter than the underneath, right? So now when I look at that fin right there, this is going to be a little bit lighter. Not a little bit, it's going to be quite a bit lighter. It has light that's coming back here. Now, the one thing I didn't talk about is reflective light. Light comes in and it bounces. Okay, so I might have some light that's going to come down here, hit the ground. Would this fin be pure black underneath? No. Would there be variation in its tone? Yes. Where the fin gets closer to the ground, that means more light is going to be bouncing real quick. So it's going to be a little bit lighter, and draw this in green, on the tip right here. Because that's closer to where the light's bouncing. As it recedes back, it's going to get a little bit darker. Because it's further away from the light source it's reflecting back. Light reflects, it bounces. The greatest exercise you can do, which is free, is that you can take a candle, don't light anything on fire though, on a plate, in your room, turn off all the lights, take the candle and put it on the far side of your room, and go back to the other side and just observe. And look at how the light is bouncing. Look at how the shadows are casting. Look at the diffusion of the shadows. Look at how the light is reflecting on different surfaces. For example, if I had a sketchbook with this cover right here, this has a shiny cover, is going to reflect some of that light. Versus if I have a white piece of paper next to that sketchbook. Imagine if I had a candle lit 4 feet away. I'm going to draw this on here so you won't think I'm crazy, because you can't see it. Imagine if I had in my room a candle right here, and then I have a sketchbook that's right here, and on that sketchbook I have a white piece of paper, but right here then I have a chrome ball. Light is going to reflect off of this shiny surface, bounce back into that chrome sphere. Excuse me, light's going to come back and hit this white piece of paper. Is it going to reflect? A little, but not nearly as much as that shiny surface, is it? So that chrome ball is going to have more light reflections on this half of it than it will on the back half. Why? Because the back half is sitting on a white piece of paper, but the front half is sitting on a nice shiny reflective sketchbook cover. Aha! Now I have to start thinking about surfaces and textures. that are combined into my render of my ship. I'm not asking you to spend hours of rendering on this, but I am going to call you out on whether or not shadows look right, whether or not shadows are casting. I did a base vehicle right here. From the direction of my light, what do I know about the shadow that's going to hit at this angle right here? It's going to wrap that way. Does that make sense? I know that the backside right here is going to be a little bit darker, and then it's going to get a little bit lighter as it comes up, and then this shadow is going to wrap over. This shadow is going to be darker here, but then it's going to what? Delineate, because then there's other light coming back that's going to hit part of the shadow back in there. Okay? So now I can just talk to myself, not like a crazy person, but as an artist and as a designer, I can ask myself, this fin's going to be darker here, but then it's going to get lighter as it moves out. Because as it gets lighter, there's more light poking through right here that's going to hit the top of that fin. Okay? This, depending on my light angle, this fin is only going to cast a shadow and end about right there because of the angle that my light's coming at. This canopy is going to have a highlight all here and here, and then the rest of this right here is going to be in shadow because it's not directly in the light source. I might have a little bit of a highlight down here, then I might come in here and put this in shadow and have a highlight across that surface. Does that make sense? You guys see where I'm going with this? I'm planning and mapping out through perspective how the light's going to be affecting. Now, I know it looks weird when you look at this drawing with all these different elements in there, but it makes sense. I'm figuring out and adjusting where my light's coming from, how the shadow of my vehicle is casting, and what facades and planes on my vehicle are going to have different value presets right from the beginning. When you get more advanced and then later you get to Photoshop and you're drawing a big mech, then you have to take into consideration what are the different textures on my vehicle. If I have a rubber handles that go up, is rubber reflective? Nope. Versus I might have a wing that's made out of a chrome silver. Versus I might have another part of the ring that's metal, but it has a blue coat on it of paint. That blue coat isn't going to be reflective, but boy, that chrome is sure going to be reflective. And the rubber won't be reflective. That's different. That's more advanced. But this right here gives you a good, starting point to figure out where the light's coming from, how the vehicle is working, where the shadow is, how things are casting, and how everything else is taking place. All right, I'm going to end it right there.